I don't know if you follow here, but Facebook changed its algorithm. I think they changed it last year to basically, you know, in totality, they were going to basically decrease the amount that news stories, and news outlets were shown in your feeds. So they were going down from about 5% to 4% that you'd see news stories and news outlets. But they decided of the news stories and news outlets they were going to show, they were going to elevate the most trustworthy news sources. The most trustworthy news sources. And who decides what the most trustworthy news sources are? Well, let's take a look here. Let's take a look. Mark Zuckerberg, who's been under fire recently. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg said Tuesday that the company has already begun to implement a system that ranks news organizations based on trustworthiness and promotes or suppresses its content based on the metric. Oh, that's nice that Facebook's finally admitting they're suppressing content. How democratic. Zuckerberg said the company has gathered data on how consumers perceive brands by asking them to identify whether they have heard of various publications and if they trust them. Quote, "We put that data into the system and it is acting as a boost or a suppression, and we're going to dial up the intensity of that over time," he said. "We feel like we have a responsibility to further break down polarization and find common ground." Zuckerberg met with a group of news media executives at the Rosewood Sand Hill Hotel in Menlo Park after delivering his keynote speech. And of course, the meeting included representatives from BuzzFeed, The Information, Quartz, The New York Times, CNN, The Wall Street Journal, NBC, Recode, Univision, Barron's, The Daily Beast, The Economist, HuffPost, Insider, The Atlantic, The New York Post, and others. That is a murderer's row of establishment legacy news outlets right there. The event, called OTR, shorthand for Off the Record, is an annual gathering meant for new media executives to talk shop. Zuckerberg said the company will invest billions of dollars in a combination of artificial intelligence and tens of thousands of human moderators to keep both fake news and deliberate propaganda at bay, especially in elections. Quote, "We're essentially going to be losing money on doing political ads," he said, of the investment company is making to avoid a repeat of the spread of Russian propaganda. Quote, "The big miss is we didn't expect these kinds of coordinated information operations in 2016, and that the company was more focused on hacking in malware." So I don't even know where to start with this. I don't even know where to start. First of all, so Facebook is basically going to have its users rank who the trustworthy news is and who isn't. So Facebook users are going to be nominating who's trustworthy and who's not. And it seems that the criteria is, Zuckerberg said the company has gathered data on how consumers perceive news brands by asking them to identify whether they have heard of various publications and if they trust them. Oh, so basically the criteria Facebook is using is essentially name brand news organizations like CNN, like the New York Times, like the Washington Post, like the Associated Press, like the Daily Beast, like BuzzFeed, and on and on and on. So that is the criteria. Well, let me ask you a question, Mark Zuckerberg. Let's say the shoe were on the other foot. Let's say social media was a much, much bigger thing back when you wanted to launch Facebook, right? Let's say, there was problems with social media outlets, allowing fake news and these things back in 2004 when you launched Facebook. And in order to block out these bad social media platforms that are letting users abuse it, well, users were allowed to rank what are the trustworthy social media outlets. And surveys were done where they asked users, have you heard of this social media outlet? And what do you think? Well, if Facebook was just starting out there, how would Facebook even get off the ground? If the whole basis on ranking your most trusted news outlets was based on familiarity with that news outlet, or in the case I just created, social media platform. This is not about ranking trustworthy news outlets. This is about elevating establishment, legacy, corporate media that is known, and making sure independent media or freelancers who just starting out never have their content seen. That is exactly what this is for. Make no mistake about it. And they've been doing it to me, like my Facebook posts and videos used to get a lot more likes and views. Now I'll be lucky if you get like 100 views on a video because people simply don't see it. It doesn't show up in their feeds. Same thing on YouTube. For the 12,300 YouTube subscribers I have, I should be closer to 150 to 200 live viewers. But I'm getting anywhere between, 75 to 100 on any given day because they're not actually putting the videos in the feed. They're not actually delivering the videos to subscribers. They're not actually notifying people that sign up for notifications. This is all a grand censorship program. And do you know one of the components that leads to fascism? Censorship. And what if an individual like me and Jen, my business partner, want to launch a new media company? And we refuse to launch that new media company attached to corporate money. And we refuse to launch that media company getting sponsorships from banks or fossil fuel companies or big pharma or any of that. And part of launching a new media company is getting those numbers up as high as you can and building a subscription service, which Patreon is. Well, it's a lot harder to do that, right? If you're not trustworthy, like the New York Times. Like if you're not ranked as trustworthy, like the Washington Post. You know how trustworthy the New York Times is, who pretty much was instrumental in passing along and fomenting a a real war based on fake intelligence. They're so trustworthy, the New York Times. Washington Post, same thing with the Iraq War. Washington Post, so trustworthy, reporting that Russia hacked the Vermont electricity grid, never even doing a retraction when that story was proven to be completely bogus. BuzzFeed, who literally published a Trump whatever dossier, just openly saying we haven't verified any of this. Trustworthy. How are the journalists of the future supposed to start if nobody could see their reports on Facebook, if nobody could see their channels on YouTube? People should sink or swim based on their content. People should sink or swim based on their popularity. People should sink or swim based on the demand for their content. On the merits. If I'm out there versus other people, we should have the same opportunity to be seen and heard. Because that is kind of what YouTube means, right? It's about you and me and us. That is what Facebook is supposed to be. They call it the democratization of the world. Well, it's not democracy when you're picking winners and losers. And by the way, I don't even believe Facebook when they say the viewers are the users are ranking people. Get the hell out of here. Their users aren't ranking news. It's Facebook that's ranking the news. There are human moderators that are basically deciding and picking winners and losers. And you want to know something? These kind of things have life and death consequences. Life and death consequences. So let me explain. When I was at Standing Rock, when I worked at the Young Turks, I was at Standing Rock 7 times, right? This didn't happen yet. YouTube wasn't yet screwing around with its algorithm and screwing people like me, and Facebook hadn't changed its algorithm yet. So I was fortunate enough to be visible and seen by hundreds of thousands of people. In totality, those videos and those live streams were seen by hundreds of thousands of people on TYT's channel, TYT Politics. Well, I've had Native Americans come up to me multiple times saying, you and your reporting saved lives. And I thought, what do you mean save lives? Without the cameras, they said, not me, without the cameras and the attention on these protests, these demonstrations, police probably would have started shooting real bullets, but they knew they were being watched by the world. And not just my cameras, the other independent media that were there and the documentary filmmakers that were there. But what happens when the next Standing Rock happens or the next Flint, unfortunately, which is going to happen? or the next protest with police brutality that corporate media doesn't cover because Russia or Trump isn't involved. What happens when reporters like me or people I want to hire are live, but we're not seen because you don't know we're live? What happens when the cameras capturing people getting killed or people being poisoned or police brutalizing people if we don't get seen? We're not kings. You don't get to decide what's trustworthy and what's not. All right, if you want to actually have real moderators to erase fake news, and when I say fake news, I mean fake news, fake articles, fake stories, provably false stuff. Good, you should have that. But you don't get to decide and basically prop up your pals at CNN and the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Associated Press while suppressing Jimmy Dore, suppressing my channel, suppressing Mike Figueredo. So that's what I think of Facebook. That's what I think of suppression. And we'll have a lot more to say about this, including our friends at YouTube.